Hello, friends. Is the confrontation between James and John over? What will be the fate of Tu Diep? James and Tu Diep thought that all the difficulties were gradually passing. But little did they know that another storm was brewing. John, who once tried to sabotage James, now back with a new plan. One afternoon, when Tu Diep was busy picking vegetables in the garden, she suddenly heard a loud noise near the house. Sounded like someone fell down. Tu Diep ran out quickly, then saw a man lying motionless near the fence. She panicked and approached, and her heart sank when she realized it was John. Volt looks much more haggard than before. Wrinkled clothes, pale face, weak breathing, like about to collapse. John, what's wrong? Tu Diep worried about infecting John. John opened his eyes slightly, his voice weak and broken. I, Tu Diep, have no one to rely on anymore. She was confused, even though she knew John had confronted James. But seeing him like this, she cannot turn a blind eye. She shook and helped him into the house. For the next 2 days, Tu Diep took good care of John. She cooks porridge and puts on a warm towel, even stayed up all night to watch over him, for fear that John would become more seriously ill. Every time she asked, Dung just said vaguely that he was seriously ill, evicted and with nowhere to go. I used to be a person who had everything, but now I have nothing left, Dung said in a sorrowful voice. Tu Diep looked at John with sympathy in her heart, even though he was once James's enemy. But now he is just a lonely man, helpless. She couldn't bear to chase him away. The next morning, when Tu Diep brought porridge into the room, she was startled to find the bed empty. John is gone. She looked around confused, but no trace of him. Leave no goodbye, say nothing. This made her feel something very strange. Is John really just a pathetic guy? Or is this part of his next plan? She had no idea that right now, John returned to the city and started a new plot. He has reached the weak point of Tu Diep. And this time he didn't just want to take down James. He wants to have Tu Diep. After leaving Tu Diep's house, John didn't actually leave but quietly watched her from a distance. He knew he couldn't confront James head-on, but he still has another way. Capture the heart of Purple Leaf. He believes that if you are patient and skillful enough, he can make the leaves sway. And so a calculated plan began. John understood that Tu Diep was a kind girl, always ready to help others. That's why he decided to continue pretending to be weak. He rented a small house near the market, where Tu Diep often goes to do business. He deliberately appeared there looking so haggard, to accidentally meet her again. And just as he predicted, when Tu Diep saw him in a miserable state, she could not ignore. Why are you here? She was surprised to see him sitting curled up in a hidden corner near the market. John smiled sadly. I have nowhere to go. After my company collapsed, I lost everything. I just want to start over. But life is not that easy. Tu Diep looked at him with a heart filled with sympathy. She didn't know that this was just a show he set up. If you need anything, just tell me, she said softly. John looked at her with fake gratitude. Just occasionally she comes over to talk to. I am enough. Tu Diep did not know that. Her kindness accidentally led her into John's trap. One afternoon, James went to the market to find Tu Diep, but accidentally saw her sitting talking with John. That moment made my heart heavy. Why is John here, and why is Zi the helping him? James did not come immediately. He just stood from afar quietly observing. I saw the way John looked at Tu Diep with an innocent look, just grateful. Something is wrong. That evening when Tu Diep returned home, James was waiting. I met John at the market. His voice dropped. Tu Diep was a bit startled but still calmly answered, "Yes, he is in trouble. I cannot leave him alone." James clenched his fist. He knows John well. He is never that simple. "Do you know John tried to harm me?" James asked seriously. "I know." Tu Diep nodded, but now he had nothing left. "We cannot keep hating." James looked at her with worry in his heart. Tu Diep is too kind, and that's what makes her vulnerable. John knew James was beginning to suspect him, but he is not worried. On the contrary, he accelerated his plan. He began to approach Tu Diep more, find every way to make her sympathize with him. He told about his past, about the pain he has been through. "I once loved a girl, but for money and power she left me," John said, deliberately revealing a bit of pain. Tu Diep looked at him with a bit of pity. "I don't want to lose another friend." He continued. At this time, Tu Diep completely believed that John really wanted to change. She did not know that in his eyes. She is no longer just a nice person, which is part of James' revenge plan. James couldn't sit still, so he decided to meet John in person. The meeting took place in a deserted cafe. "I know what you are doing, John." James said it straight. John smirked. I didn't understand what he was saying. Match clenched hands, eyes sharp. "Don't think I don't know your plans." He approached Tu Diep not because of friendship, but because he wanted to divide them. John smiled faintly and took a sip of coffee, wondering if he was scared. "I am not afraid of you, but I don't want the leaves to be hurt because of your mean tricks." John put the cup of coffee down on the table. Eyes suddenly became sharp. "You are wrong. I don't need to do anything. You are the one who is hurting Tu Diep." James frowned. He is too busy with work, too ambitious with his projects. "Are you sure you really understand what the leaf wants?" James clenched his fist. John's words were like a knife stabbing straight into his heart. He is trying to make him waver. "You will never have Zi," the James said firmly. John just smiled with a meaningful look in his eyes. "We'll just have to wait and see." The following days, Tu Diep realized that James was becoming more and more distant. He is not as happy as before. Sometimes his eyes looked at her full of worry. And John still appeared by accident, still bring her emotional stories. Tu Diep stands between two men, between the past and the present, between trust and doubt. Little did she know that a real war was about to take place. And this time, it's not just between James and John, but also between her heart and herself. After the confrontation with James, Dung became more determined. He is in no hurry because he knows what he wants to achieve. That from today, James needs to have a long-term plan. He not only wants the leaves, he also wants to destroy James. The following days, John appears more into Tu Diep's life, even though she didn't mean to meet him. But somehow, he always appears when she needs help. When she had difficulty selling, John unexpectedly came to help. When it rains, He appeared with an umbrella, standing silently to cover her. When she feels tired, he is always there to listen and comfort her. John was in no hurry to express his feelings. He just silently planted a seed of trust in her heart. And then that seed gradually grew. James is not stupid. I know something is going on between John and Tu Diep. Even though she didn't say anything, her eyes were different when she mentioned John. No longer as vigilant as before. No longer see John as an enemy. But instead of sympathy, James knew that was a danger signal. He decided to face Tu Diep. "I still see John?" you asked directly. Tu Diep paused a bit, but she did not deny it. He changed. James looked at her deeply, feeling his heart ache a little. "Change?" He smiled faintly. "I really believe a fox can turn into a sheep sow." Tu Diep did not know how to answer. John really looks different, compared to the calculating man before. She began to wonder, can people change because of life events? One afternoon, when Tu Diep was harvesting earthworm vegetables, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her seriously. Tu Diep wiped her sweat and looked at him. "What's up?" Dung hesitated a bit, then said softly, "I think I'm leaving here." Tu Diep was surprised. "Why? I have no reason to stay anymore." John smiled sadly. "I thought I could start over, but maybe I was wrong." Tu Diep suddenly felt awkward. Dung is deliberately creating a separation to make her waver. And his plan worked. "You don't have to go." She whispered that he could still start over. Looked at her for a long time, then suddenly grabbed her hand. "Tu Diep, if I said I wanted to start over, but not alone, but with her." Tu Diep startled and pulled her hand back, and her heart was beating wildly. John said something she never thought of. She doesn't love him. But why, when he said he was leaving, she felt a little disappointed again. Just then James appeared. He came to see Tu Diep, but the sight before his eyes made him stunned. John was standing very close to her, and her eyes were no longer cold as before. For a moment James felt as if he had lost her. He walked up to James with angry eyes. His voice was cold as ice. John turned back, but he didn't show any surprise. He knew James would come. Actually, he wanted James to see the scene. James grabbed Violet's hand and pulled her away from John. "Do you still believe him?" His voice dropped, filled with despair. How do you like today's video?